Well. If it isn't all of you. And me. What is up, y'all? Happy Friday morning. We'll see how many people come to hang. It is a work day, so I'd be surprised if everybody's just able to take time off this morning. But I've been getting a lot of requests to go through the last project, and like I said in a couple of streams before, it's been easier for me now to do, after having done so many of the loops live the whole time, it's easier for me at this point to be able to put more time into them. I mean, slightly more time. I say more time, and it was still like, this one was what, like 10 hours or something? By comparison to doing all of it live at once. And now that I've actually, it's been what, like 2 weeks since I put this one out or something, I've got some more insights and different ways I can explain things that I wouldn't be able to under the pressure of, you know, still having to try and animate the thing and not have it take like 12 hours or something. So anyway, super excited to get to hang with y'all today. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a second. But what's up, David? Glad to see you. Broken, glad to see you. Terry, glad to see you. M. Seti, glad to see you. Yeah, what's happening, y'all? What is up? But anyway, I'm gonna go through the project linearly as if I were animating it, just to like go through what my process was and those sorts of things. But at any time throughout the stream, feel free to ask questions about any specific part of the animation or anything like that, and I will be happy to go through that as well. So we'll go ahead and jump into some of the first bits, shall we? What up, Sam? Glad to see you. For those of you that don't know, Mseti and Sam are two new members of the Review team. We've got lots of changes happening just on the team over the past few months, and really glad to have them on. We all just got through another big project. That was exciting. Client was happy, and yeah, glad to see all y'all. I'll hop on into this mode, and my keybinds still work. That's good. But anyway, I want this to be the general plan for the next little while anyway, is doing these sort of breakdown streams instead. They'll be a little bit shorter. This will probably be like an hour and a half or so. But anyway. Sam says, is that a new place you're at? No, I just opened the blinds. Since it's in the morning. And it's like the first day of fall here. I'm really just enjoying having the windows open and stuff. Seti says, hi, I please have a free loop, please. My favorite color is purple. You know, we'll get you on. Don't even worry. I know this guy named Noah who likes purple, and I'm sure he'd be happy to give you a loop for free. So it's just out of the kindness of his heart, I'm sure. But anyway, I've got a bunch of these adjustment layers turned off, and we're in quarter quality because I forgot just how much stuff I loaded on top of this project at the very end. But anyway, I'll actually I'll pull up the storyboard for this as well. I say storyboard, it's pretty loose, honestly. That's one of the things that, like, before I started streaming the projects, some of my favorite ones were ones where I had like the first or second frame, and then the rest of it I just kind of made up along the way, instead of having it all planned out ahead of time. Let me go ahead and open that up 1 second, and we'll take a look at that first, because that's where I started for like the first frame of this thing. Renando says, hey, Austin, been looking forward to this since you released the loop. Me too. I had a couple people on Reddit that were that set reminders or something a week after I posted it, and they're like, so where's the live stream? And I was like, that's awkward. Projects have been super busy over the past few weeks. It's been hard to find time to really be able to sit down and stream and be able to collect my thoughts. But I'm excited to be able to do that today. And here we go. All right. Here we go. Ooh, parts of the storyboard look pretty. See, that's where this will get confusing. All right, here, let's move on over to Illustrator. I'll make sure that changed. So I wrote down a couple things that I wanted to happen. I don't actually have my notebook here with me right now. I should probably go and grab that too. See, I'm out of it now. I'm not I'm out of practice on streaming. but I'll go ahead and grab that in just a minute. But essentially what I wanted to happen at the beginning of this audio, there's this little bit of like a that happens, like a little bit of a click. And to me, as soon as I heard that, it really just sounded like a lampshade, or not a lampshade, but like, you know, a pull chain lamp, where you turn on the lamp by pulling a chain, and it makes a fun clinking noise. And so what I wanted to have happen is this ball comes in, it's swirling up, and then it just like slams down and gets caught by this string that appears, that like shuts out the lights, and puts all the lights inside of this orb that's on the string instead. So I took a very, very minimal approach to storyboarding this. You can barely even see the difference between the colors here, but there's this like light purple, or this kind of dark purple on this background here. I'll switch that just so you can see it for now. But anyway, I had that form done, and then I knew I wanted to have some like reactive lights and things, so I wasn't doing any of the texturing and the stylizing really in Illustrator at all this time. I was really going to save most of that for After Effects, because I knew I wanted to do some interesting gradients that I would have had to use mesh gradients in here, and I knew those wouldn't transfer over with Overlord, so, you know, I was just taking a more lax approach. But anyway, then I was like, all right, I need some really big moment to happen when the beat drops in the song. So we've got this thing on a pull chain. It's already doing this swing back here whenever it clicks into place. So I'm like, all right, well, it's bound to just like shoot off to the side. I was like, what could happen there? And I had this idea of, I didn't know it was going to be a ball at that point still, but this thing just like slicing through this solid, and it's like peeling it back along the way with this like big jet of light coming out. And so I took time to I was trying to figure out how I was going to animate the like pulling back of these, and we'll get to that in a bit. But the idea that I had originally was to just do some path animation, and I'm pretty sure that's what I ended up doing. But it was generally just like making sure I had the points or the anchor handles to the correct position, so that when I moved it over to After Effects, it would be easy enough to move those points and the curves would adjust properly. So I made those two big shapes, and I had this like little cone of light that I wanted in front of the ball, so it looks like it's peeling this away, and there's really just like this huge thing of light that's underneath it. But anyway, then I really set things up for myself to be a little more difficult. I didn't want to deal with particles or anything, but I just made the trail out of a couple paths. And then here's where things get a little more complicated. And this is probably one of the hardest scenes throughout the entire video. I'd actually venture to say the hardest one. So I had this idea at first of this thing as it's like cutting through these two sides. I wanted it to then like swirl around and like come up to be this disc that's rotating on top of this this platform here. I decided to do a circle instead of a flat platform, because I always do flat platforms, and I thought this would be more interesting. And so I got a couple references. You see this like www.grandillusions, whatever. I looked up a Euler's disc on YouTube. It's these discs where they're very, very heavy, and when you spin them, they take forever to stop spinning and become flat, because all of their momentum, instead of it being like lateral momentum, is translating into angular momentum. So as it falls further down, that energy is conserved, and it just starts rotating faster and faster and faster until it sounds like kind of like a jet engine almost. It's really interesting. But anyway, so I got a couple frames from that video, just of someone spinning it to get reference. And you can, because I didn't want to do it in 3D, so I'm trying to figure out how to do faux 3D for this. So I was like, all right, let's break this out into shapes. And I don't have it on here anymore. I must have moved it. But essentially what I did was just draw the front, and then there's like a little lip under here. So I duplicated that circle and put it underneath. And that would, if I went back and did that again, would just look something like, oh, that's a rectangle. Would look something like this, except this one is this darker thing here. So something like this, and then obviously there's that little lip, so I ended up having to use a rounded rectangle, except the top two corners weren't rounded. But anyway, that was effectively it. And then for like over here, I just used a rectangle that would appear to be the side, and have the edges slightly rounded. But anyway, so I kind of took this same shape and then just duplicated it and fit it into each of these frames. And then what I thought I could do was bring all those paths into After Effects and then keyframe them. And then, so like, let's say I took this into After Effects. I took this shape into After Effects here, right? But then I had this other one that was this side view, and let's just have that be like a rectangle for now. And then what I was gonna do was make a keyframe so that I could take the data for this path and then copy that onto the path for this shape. So that way I would actually be able to just animate the path data between the ellipse and then turning into a rectangle and so on. It didn't quite work out that easily. I mean, listening back to my logic on that, it just doesn't quite make sense because you have to make sure that the paths are the same, and if like it has to interpolate, if After Effects has to interpolate the data, it gets kind of wonky. Things will like wrap over each other and it gets a little strange. But anyway, effectively I just made a keyframe before getting into After Effects for each of these just to see what the shape needed to look like. And then as I continued to work in After Effects, I realized that my original idea wasn't going to work with having that rounded rectangle on the bottom, or actually having it be this disc shape at all. It was just going to be too complicated, and it was going to take me much longer to figure out a rig for, or have to hand animate a lot more than I thought I was going to. So what I ended up doing instead was taking the same sort of approach, but with this like teacup shape instead, and that let me sort of roll it around instead of it having to actually like rotate around the bottom, because having to figure out how to make the edge of a cylinder touch a platform on all of its different points is a very difficult thing to figure out for 3D purposes anyway. So this seemed like an easier solution to me, and that's what I went with. And then the idea was going to be that this thing spins on top of this until it comes to rest, and then we've got this like square inside of this platform that'll have some interesting glow inside of it, just to like rotate a little bit to keep things interesting. And then from there, I wanted to do a pretty smooth transition to this domino scene. So all I needed to do was make this rectangle shape here, and I was like, all right, how do I go from this to this rectangle? So I was gonna have all of these shapes slide up to the top of the frame, and so this would be up here, and I think you can probably see where I'm going to go with this. But then as everything slides back down, these top anchor points would stay up at the top, and all of everything else would fall down. So we're like stretching that shape out to actually form the rectangle that's over here. And then, you know, I ended up having to make all of these different like textures and different like gradient passes that would fit within those rectangles. But effectively, I just made like a row of these same shapes, and they just knock into each other like dominoes. And then I wanted it to continually speed up. So like the dominoes fall faster and faster and faster until they get so fast that we zoom out and we see them all actually falling over each other in this like radial pattern, making this cool spiral that we can then... So, all right, so we see all of these spiraling and making this cool radial pattern, and then they'll actually unspiral, and we'll zoom in to get this like cool ribbon thing of these paths that kind of just like warp out from each other and then collapse back in, so we have this explosion happen. And then, wow, I really did do so much of this in just this two-tone thing and relied on After Effects for a lot of the coloring at this point. But anyway, then what I decided I wanted to happen from there was each of these shapes kind of like pulses out from the center. Like we have this big tunnel that starts over here and then just continues to like send shapes off to the bottom left. And so what I needed for that was this rig of rings, and then I was going to linearly scale those up. We'll get into this in After Effects in more detail, but I was going to linearly scale those up and be able to make a tunnel that way, make it look like we're zooming past things. And then these shapes would follow a similar pattern where they're linearly like scaling up and down, or they're scaling up and moving down and to the left at the same time to make this cool pattern of shapes until we have our hero orb comes back in. It's actually soaring alongside the shapes, traveling down the tunnel, and it taps into one of the shapes and then explodes them out into this this other grid of shapes here that'll be colored with gradients at that point. And then our ball flies around through here, and then I knew this end scene was another thing I wanted from the very beginning. I wanted to try and make some reactive hair type thing without doing Houdini or any other simulation stuff, which turned out to be really difficult and annoying, but it was just a cool thing to have tried. So the ball sort of floats around here, and then it zooms off to the side of the screen again, and we cut to it zooming down this colored hallway, and it's lighting up each of these hairs and like making them do like what a blade of grass would look like if a jet flew by it, you know? That sort of like flopping back and forth movement, or I guess like if you have a comb and you like flick your finger across the parts of the comb. But anyway, that was all the thought that was happening in the storyboarding phase. A lot of this actually happened like as I was making the video, but the general thoughts were all there on how I would do these things. So that all being said, let's hop into After Effects. I'll actually look at chat real quick to answer some questions, and then we'll hop more into the animation. But there's all the general storyboarding thoughts. He says, on a serious note, yeah, it's quite green out there. Yeah, for real. It's like the air is just so clean today. It feels phenomenal outside. Nine Azum says, hey, glad to see ya. Jira, I think I said that right. Do you think motion designers should have their own unique selling point? That could be taken in a couple different ways. I think it can definitely be helpful to niche down, if that's what you mean. So while it can be really great to be able to do all sorts of different type of motion like cell and 3D and 2D snappy motion stuff like this, and character animation and all of that stuff, making sure that you're really good, especially at one particular thing, is going to make you more attractive for like specific jobs. Like if there's someone that wants somebody really, really good at character animation and they've got a bunch of people applying and they're all focused on like all of these different parts of motion, but there's one that's really on character animation, then they're probably going to pick that person, you know? It puts you in a smaller group of people to choose from rather than just the entirety of motion design. But at the same time, I do think that that's not to say not to have a background in as many things as you can. Like, I don't do a lot of 3D animation, but I generally know the basics of Blender and how I could animate something in 3D if I needed to. It just wouldn't be up to the same caliber necessarily as like the 2D stuff that I do for the loops, because that's the majority of the stuff I'm spending time on. So I don't know. I think it's good to have one thing that you're particularly good at, but then still be baseline good with anything else that you're interested in. Terry says, your videos are always so in sync. Do you get the ideas first or the music? Well, I guess not always, but 95% of the time I would say it's music first. It just helps me. I actually had a podcast a couple weeks ago that I was on, where the host asked something similar, and what I was telling him was that there's times throughout the process where Noah and I look crazy while we're doing it, but we'll usually start with a voiceover or a piece of music or something, and we will just sit there with our eyes closed and be able to listen to it and see what general movements should be happening, mostly direction wise. Like, it's not, we can come up with things like, maybe there's an orb here that's moving this way, or maybe it's like maybe there's this character that's doing this and this and this. But generally what's happening is kind of like when, you know, in Ratatouille, Remy eats the strawberry and the cheese at the same time, and he gets these little like visions and things above his head and whatever. It's that sort of thing where it really is just, you know, after doing it for so long, we've figured out a way to just naturally see the general movements of things and go from there. But the audio is really, really helpful in just getting that general pacing and tone of things. Bruce says, I cannot make storyboards for personal projects. What should I do? I mean, what I had was barely a storyboard there. Usually what I do is just write down what ideas I have first, and then whatever I need to storyboard, I'll storyboard for personal stuff. As long as you're continuing to push on your personal project and whatever you're trying to make, then I don't think it's necessarily a problem to not have a storyboard. But try and make sure that in other ways you are setting other restraints to make sure that you continue moving on in your process, because you don't want to be like, oh, well, I don't have a storyboard done, so I guess I can't start animating or whatever. It's like, no, there's no rules. There's no rules to this thing. So just make sure that you have something to keep you going. Like if you can even come up with one scene, try and animate that one scene and then figure out where to go from there. Like that's how a lot of the ideation phase works for me, is I have one scene that I can see working, and then it's depending on where it is in the video, it's either just building forward or backward from there, to sort of be like, okay, well that happened, so what makes sense to happen in the next scene or in the scene that got us here. And that's typically how I think about it. Zen Gain says, hey y'all, glad to see ya. Priyam says, would you please upload the whole process in a separate video after the stream, given if you've recorded while storyboarding and animating? I did not do a screen recording of storyboarding and animating. That would be a huge file. But maybe in the future I'll do that. David says, morning, glad to see ya. Zengain says, how long did this animation take you? I'm pretty sure this one was, I think I said 10 hours earlier, but that might not have been right. Let me check. I know I posted it on Instagram. Maybe it was 14? Does it say? Yeah, 14 hours from concept to final export. I did that loop over the course of like in pretty small bits. For a while, like ideating and that sort of thing. I'd come up with the idea for like one scene, and then we'd have to jump back on another thing for a client project or something. So I wasn't actually able to animate until maybe like a week after I had the idea set, and that probably did help me like solidify the idea a bit more. But all in all, it was around 14 hours. Cool. Terry says, that's really insightful. Thanks for answering. No problem. And Priyam says, because the recording, the whole process helps a lot, especially for a beginner like me. I totally understand that. And, you know, if I can find a way to make it work to be able to show the whole thing, then, you know, I'll do that for sure. But all right. Oh, one more. Garth says, finally made it in time. This is my first time catching you live, Austin. Glad to see you. Welcome, welcome. All right. Shall we hop into the nitty gritty of the animation? Let me play the audio real quick. It's probably going to be absurdly loud. So I'll turn that down a bit and pause the Spotify. All right, here we go. I mean, I'll tell you right now, this is my favorite one I've done. Like, without a doubt, it just feels really solid the whole way through. The pacing, I feel like, actually does keep your eye the entire time. Like, just won't let go. But it's also not too fast. I think there'd been a couple loops where I'd just done like something was only there for like a quarter of a second. How can you take that in? I don't know. But anyway. So like I said, we had that ball that soars up, which is actually all in 12 FPS originally, because I added this like a low pass to the audio and made it sound more like it was on a telephone at first, and then the audio like clears up whenever the big impact is going to happen. So it's kind of like we're underwater at first, and then boom, when we get to here, the audio is very crisp and clear. But anyway, so in conjunction with that, because the audio sounded kind of crunchy and like it's on a telephone, I wanted to make the visual look a little strange at the beginning, so I added a couple different passes to this first object. It's just the ball, and it's got, actually, which one is it? Hold on. It's got mosaic and scatter on it. I mean, you only get this for like the first frame, and then it turns into like this more streak thing. It's less of a square, but that just keeps on going. There's a little bit of echo on it. And then I really liked, like I mentioned before, I was trying to find a way to then have the like pull chain turn out the lights. So I needed to have a bunch of light in the scene. So I was like, all right, we'll just backlight it. I think that makes things look really, really interesting, because you see so many things that are lit up on their own and whatever, but just having the whole background be what's lighting everything else up is a particular favorite of mine. And I've done it for quite a few of the loops at this point, but I only wanted to have just a little snippet of that in this. But anyway, so we zoom in here, and then all right, we just completely cut. You can see I just had a background layer, and then this original ball for that first bit with a couple adjustment layers. And then we've got a couple different layers down here. We've got this glow on the bottom, which is just this little little gradient guy down here. And it's just gonna go in whatever the opposite direction of the ball is. Like it's itself shining on the ball and putting a spotlight on it a little bit. And then we've got our pull chain up here. Let's see where that is. I've got a path set up there, and then I've got a null on each part of the path with the handles extended out, so that way whenever one of them moves, it automatically curves that line for me. And then, you know, I was just able to assign this bottom part of the wire here. This bottom null is just attached to the ball, so wherever the ball goes, it's just going to follow it, and that made a pretty easy rig for that. And you can get these things by just opening up whatever your path is and going down to path, selecting the word path, and then you go to create nulls from paths, which is already built into After Effects, and do points follow nulls, and it'll just generate those nulls for you. Hot tip, there you go. Anyway, that can be useful for a lot of different things. But anyway, another fun thing that was kind of accidental, whenever I made the wire, I had a gradient on it, but that was mostly just so that I could add some deep glow to it and have it look more interesting. But I ended up animating the gradient, and when this like really bright blue part, when I animated it the first time, it like automatically traveled down the line. And I was like, oh, that actually looks really cool, because it is like all of the energy is being transferred into this ball instead of having all the light on the outside bits and the background, whatever. It really looks like it's all being sent into there. I just thought that was an interesting touch. And then, you know, I wanted to take that even further and really have it with more impact. So I made this extra ring here, just called Pop, that just is the same size as the ball and then scales up over a certain amount of time. So and the main thing here is just making sure that it doesn't go on for too long, and then doing a stroke width, an animation on the stroke width to have it decrease over time as well. So it starts off at like 1 point stroke width, and then it slowly decreases. You can see down here, slowly decreases over that time as it gets larger, and that does this nice fade off thing instead of just doing an opacity fade off. But anyway, the only other real trick to this one was just making the ball look a little bit more interesting as it got pulled into this, or gets pulled onto the wire. So what I did there was, well, first of all, let's just look at the ball a little bit deeper, shall we? Inside of multiple groups, because I didn't want to have to use more nulls, so I just kept grouping things within the shape layer to get more transform properties. There are 3 gradient fills and then a normal fill, and I don't have them labeled. Sorry, Ben Marriott. Anyway, but it's just one for each of these colors, and if I turn them all off, you can just see that it's just a dark orb, which it actually looks pretty cool with just the yellow and the blue. It might look a little too bright with this, honestly. Like I might make it a little bit darker if I were to go back again. But anyway, all that these are just radial gradients. And like for this one, you can see that I've got like the start point of the radial gradient way off to the side here, and then the end bit is over here. So you can just kind of control like where it looks like that highlight is. And then and you can see that here as well. This is the actual gradient for that pink thing. There's a little bit of a fade off into blue so that it looks like it's a little bit more like integrated with the rest of the colors, and like they're kind of like refracting around inside of it. And then where the center of the gradient, radial gradient is, which is over here, I just have it set to the darkest color, and the transparency is at 0, so you can see all the other colors underneath it. And that's the same thing with each of these radial gradients. It's the same sort of setup where it's got the main color on one side, it fades off into one of the other colors in the color palette, and then fades into no opacity. Anyway, there is that. That is our ball, and the only other thing that happens to this is there's a tiny bit of overshoot rotation happening, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense physically, but just looks a little bit more interesting to me, where instead of the ball just sitting at the end of the line and swinging around, it actually does like a little bit of rotation so that it looks like the colors swirl around inside the ball a tiny bit. And you can, I mean, you can kind of see it rotating. Helps give like that extra bit of motion to show how fast it's going when it zips off the screen as well, I think. But anyway, there's that. Let's jump into this scene, shall we? Also, I'm a crazy person for having all of this basically inside of one pre-comp. There's a couple pre-comps inside of here, but yeah, anyway, I have not changed my ways. But anyway, here we go. This is one of the harder scenes to figure out. So what do we got here? We got the same ball that we have from the last scene. It's just animated slightly differently. And then we've got this really cool trail back here. This like background changes. You can see this like slight gradient where it goes from black to purple to black again. And then this jet of gradient coming from outside of the bounds here. And that like overlaps over top of this like back wall that it's splitting through as well. Anyway, so what we've got here is, like I was showing you in Illustrator, we've got this front bit that's just like full of colors that just looks a little interesting. And all I did on this one was just animate the start and end point of the gradient on there, just moving back and forth over and over again. And it makes it look like it's continuing to move back and toward the ball. So anyway, there's that. Then we've got back slice is this thing back here. This big wall. I was originally going to add gradients like swirling around inside of these walls as well to make it look like it's getting like colors pulsing through it, but I liked the composition so much and like just the stark contrast of how bright the trail was and all that stuff by the end of it that I did just ditch that idea and decided to keep it pretty simple. But anyway, and then on these, like I was talking about before, I ended up doing some path animations so you can see that it starts off just as a full rectangle. I mean, it's got this slant on it, but there's no rounding to the corners at all. And then I made this other keyframe where it's just essentially the path that was inside of the storyboard. And then it just continues to like pull this front anchor point over and over and over until we get to this end bit here. And then same thing's happening on the bottom. It's got a little bit of a inner glow on it to be able to get these like slight highlights around here. And then that's the same thing on the bottom here, except there's this little teeny tiny bit of extra glow that's coming out of the ball that actually changes with the color of the ball to make it look like it's reacting with the environment a little bit more. Anyway, there's that, but let's get to the star of the show here, shall we? We got these particles coming out of here. I mean, we got this gradient, but that just makes it look like there's a little bit more light coming out of here than there actually is. And there's some like opacity keyframes on there to make it look like it's flickering a tiny bit and make it look more, it's like a real light. Like, I mean, normally a light wouldn't be sitting there flickering, but just for the sake of the animation, it sells it a little bit more when it has a teeny tiny bit of flicker, I think. Anyway, though. Jet particles, shall we? There is echo, which actually, if I take that off, you can see it's just those paths that we were talking about before. And all that they do is just trim paths over and over and over again. It is the trim path goes from, I'll just find one of these. So it goes from 0 on the end to 100, which drags the path out. And then we have, at the same time, start is going from 0 to 100, which is bringing that beginning point to the very end again. So it like wipes on really quick and then wipes back off. And that same set of keyframe just repeats over and over and over again across every single one of the particles. There's a little bit of deep glow on it, and then the echo on top of it just like really sells just how like fast this thing is moving, and it made it look more organic and kind of cell shaded. So I thought that was a pretty interesting look that it made. It's not like technically perfect. I mean, if you look at some of these frames, there's like this one where the echo isn't quite tight enough, so they all end up splitting apart. But I don't know. I thought it ended up looking a little more grungy and interesting than without it. And that way it follows, because the jet particles themselves like aren't actually moving very much. It's just the trim paths on them. And so if they're just moving in a line, like the echo's not going to be very much on those. But because all of these are attached to a null, which is on the ball, they move as the ball moves, and so it gets this interesting like up and down echo smear as well, even though the jet particles aren't themselves like shooting out that way. Anyway, there's that scene. Easy enough, right? And then we get to this beast of a thing. So as you can see, it's that teacup shape that I was telling you about instead of the disc. And then we've got this ball on top. And now, okay, this part's going to be a little scary, but the ball is entirely hand keyframe, like frame by frame the entire way through. That's going around on top of this thing because I needed to get the perspective to be exactly right. And I had already animated the whole disc first, so I had to animate the ball reacting to the disc instead. I couldn't do it the other way around very easily. So the ball is entirely hand keyframed. It's got a good amount of echo on it, so it's got these cool smears. And then the only like difficult thing here aside from that was the disc itself. So we go into the pre-comp. Actually, I mean, outside of the pre-comp, all of the keyframes on this is just time remapping. So instead of actually, all right, I'll show this part first. It's difficult to figure out which part of this to go through. Okay, so there's some nastiness in this pre-comp. It is all linear, looks awful because it's just completely the same speed throughout the whole time. It looks all like really choppy and weird, and I would never animate anything this linearly. But for the purposes of making this look right later, I knew this was going to be the easiest way to do it. So like I said, I had taken those screenshots that I had from that video, and then I knew that I needed it to be viewed in a couple different ways. So I knew I needed to be able to see it front on, tilting to either side, and then completely from the back, like facing away from me. So that's what I did. I've got this top bit here, this top part, and all that is just like, it's just this top shape. And then the other shape is behind it here. And that's just, you know, this side bit. So what happens is on each of these, there is a set, I guess I ended up kind of hand keyframing this as well, but I hand keyframed it up until I got it to go to this like back view. So it swings around and it goes to the back. And then all I had to do is just basically reflect the shape from over here. Like this is essentially the same keyframe as this. It's just on the other side. Anyway, and so I needed to make sure that those were all in the proper spot. And then once it got back around to this same like front view, I could just copy paste this path keyframes as many times as I needed. So that's what I did. And as long as I kept it linear, that meant that whenever I went into the main comp, I could time remap it to do a full, like, or it's not an entire exponential decay, but it essentially does that like fast zippy movement that I would want. But I can fine tune that more than if I had to do that sort of easing with both the top and the bottom. Like it was already hard enough to figure out how the paths needed to work together and how they needed to look linearly. And so trying to get the easing and just make sure there were no weird hiccups or anything with After Effects, it was going to be the easiest way to do it, just linearly and then time remap it afterwards. I do that with tunnels and that sort of stuff all the time as well. It just makes it easier. So anyway, there's that. And then just to sell it a little bit extra and make it look like this reflective thing is happening here and make it look a little bit more glass or metallic is I just added this set of gradient. It's just this one shape with a bunch of gradients on it that just slides down the front of the top. And then there is a teeny tiny one. You can barely see it. It's not tiny, but the opacity is really, really low. But you can see a little bit of pink and a little bit of blue here. It rotates, like it slides left along the bottom, or I guess it slides right. I was just moving it in the wrong way. But anyway, that like extra little bit of reflection gave me something to work with whenever I was going to end up, you know, adding some deep glow and whatever, and just made it look a little more interesting. So anyway, there's that. That was the way I figured out how to do that. That was like the most modular, I guess. It allowed me to give the most changes to it later, except for the ball. I mean, that was particularly difficult because I just had to adjust it anytime I adjusted anything else. But anyway, the only other thing was just like a couple nulls on top of these that did that like jump up and then slide down that we talked about. And I know that in the storyboarding phase, I was talking about wanting to have the anchor points at the top of that shape pulled down, and that's what creates the rectangle. But that didn't end up looking right. It looked a little bit too linear and weird whenever I did that transition. There wasn't enough of an impact. So what I did instead was when it comes down here, it slams down. There's a little bit of an exposure flash to make the impact more intense. And then we just completely cut to that rectangle shape being there, and it just like bounces up after getting hit by the ball. And then here we go. As you can see, there are so many different like sets of pillars here. So let's break this down a little bit. We've got a domino shape, and then we've got a fill over the top, which is actually any one of these. And all that I did was just mat that one of these inside of each of those shapes. So what ends up happening is whenever this ball gets hit, it triggers the fill on this shape to light up and or to go from 0 to 100% opacity and then slide up slightly within that shape. And then that same thing just continues happening with every time there's an impact. So you can see that this domino is right about to hit this one, so it starts lighting up, and then same thing, same thing, same thing. It just continues that process, and then the ball is like zipping through them as well. And the way it's zipping through them is just, I have some of the pillars up above the ball in the layer stack and some of them below it, and that made it just look a little bit more interesting than the ball just flying in front of all of them the whole time. So there is that. And the way that I got each of these to fall was just by having I think I have like the anchor point of each shape. Hold on, let's see. Yeah, I've got the anchor point of each shape in the center, and the rectangles are just super tall, so it made it so I could just rotate the shapes knocking into each other while pulling everything to the side with a null. And that made it look like they were actually all falling. So there you go on that. Moving forward, you can also see there's a teeny tiny bit of rotation at the very end here. So these all kind of like start pulling up. And then that lets us cut, which, I mean, that's a really drastic cut looking at those 2 frames there. But if you play it in full speed, that rotation carries through and lets us jump to this scene where we've got the same thing, except I didn't want to I didn't want to overload the workflow by doing like a billion different fills like we had in this. I mean, you look at the storyboard and you can see that there's like 5 or 6 different variations of gradient slants that I made here. And I figured that was just going to be a little bit too cumbersome for my computer, amongst other things, like the workflow and all that, if I were to do that here. So all I did was just animate one of these cards. We can go into this pre-comp here. All it is the same sort of thing. It's got the fill inside of it, and then the base. Actually, no, it's the opposite. It's got the base shape, and then right underneath that is the entirety of the slides. So that way I could get like the most visual interest out of it. And all of them just slide through there on a mat. And then there's a little base effects thing over top that's just got like a little bit of inner glow and some other stuff on it to make it look more interesting. And a slight rotation on the card as a whole with the anchor point off to the side here on that null. And then what that allowed me to do was simply go here, duplicate it a bunch of times, and then offset the rotation. So like this one's at 30 and this one's at 60. So like every 30 degrees, there is another card that is popping in. And then I just slightly offset how those are coming in. There's also this, I thought it looked a little bit too empty whenever I did like the full rig here. And I wanted to be able to do, this was a last minute thing, adding the like decreasing opacity and blur as it moves down here, but I think it was a really nice touch. So when I added that, I realized like, oh, the edges of the screen kind of look a little bit empty now. So I just made duplicates of all of these, made so there's no scale on them really. It's pretty minimal. And then now we have this like lens that we're looking through to see all of the other pieces. But that's it. It's really just duplicating that one pre-comp a bunch of times in this radial pattern. It starts to look super interesting. And with the time being slightly offset, like you can see this image like pass through each of these when you go frame by frame. And it just made these really interesting effects. So fun tunnel there. And then, like I said, when we were talking about storyboarding, they all rotate to the right here, and then they unravel themselves and rotate back to the left to cut to this scene where we've got these ribbons, I guess. They're just different strokes with gradients on them, and then all I did was turbulent displace along with some path animation. Well, I guess I did path on some of these, but generally it was just turbulent displace with some position and scale properties. So I made like, let's look at just one of these strings here, shall we? Where are these other ones at? Hold on. Is this one? Why is there a duplicate? There we go. Yeah. So let's just look at one of these for a second. All it is just a string that starts in the center, moves over to the left, and then there's one null that rotates everything. And so when I add the other strings in, we can slowly start to see it's just the same thing. String starts kind of in the center and then moves to a certain part of the screen, and then lets us, you know, make it look like there's an opening that starts to appear in the center of the screen when you get enough of them.
Can you say that again?
No. Alexa's going off. She's very interested in motion design, I guess. So anyway, you get enough strings on the screen, and then when you move them apart.
Here's an answer from an Alexa Answers contributor that I translated.
Oh yeah,
Please,
great.
did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks for your feedback.
Oh yeah, no problem. That was funny. Anyway, so you get enough of those there, and you just pull them apart with position keyframes, add some turbulent displace, and it looked like they were warping enough like how I wanted. If you look at the Glint challenge winner for the Review challenges by Sonny Clark, he has this whole scene where there's all of these paths that are just like warping, and it looks like it got strummed by something. It's very cool looking. And looks very organic, and I wanted to replicate that a little bit, but I did not have enough time to figure out how to make it look as good as that, so this was my solution. But anyway, let's look at some questions for a second. Zengain says, wouldn't it have been easier to do the half ball spin with a bunch of circles with set mats, animating vertical scale and rotation? Or, I believe he's talking about for this scene here. Easier to do the half ball spin with a bunch of circles with set mats, animating vertical scale and rotation. Maybe. I honestly don't know how that, I don't quite know how that would have worked. I'm not entirely understanding. Half ball spin with a bunch of circles with set mats, animating vertical scale and okay, I see. No, that does make sense. And I think I actually tried to do that the first time, like I had, but I think I didn't push it far enough to realize that I could have done it that way, because I did a null for rotation along the whole thing, but I was like, I can't get the position of this thing to be right, given I realized I could have totally just done like a 3D layer and then, you know, rotated the null so where it's rotating around the center that way. Totally right. You know, it's been a while since I hand keyframed some stuff, so I guess it didn't hurt to have the practice, but anyway. David says, does a repeater not do those things here? I don't think you can add a repeater to pre-comps. If it was just a shape, I would think that would work, but I'm pretty sure you can't do repeaters on pre-comps. And because I needed to do this mat of the texture inside of the base here, I don't think I would have been able to add repeaters to each of these shapes either. Maybe there's a way to do that. I'm not sure. Let's keep on moving. So yeah, those spread apart and then they all collapse back into each other. There's a little bit of an exposure flash here. And then we get into that tunnel scene that I was talking about. We're going to see more of that linear movement technique and then adding on time remapping on top of that here. So anyway, what we have going on here is two separate things that move linearly. There is the circles here, all of these backing guys that are all these rings. And I mean, you can see if I just play it here. Everything is just, I mean, it's moving fast, but all of it is moving linearly. And so what I was able to do there is pre-comp all of these. And I mean, all that's happening here is I animate a single one of these shapes. So it's just one of these circles. And if we actually solo that, you can see it just scales up. That's it. And eventually it gets off screen. So all that needs to happen after that is I mean, here we can look at this. It's just scale moving up. So I figure out just like how many frames later another one should start. And then you just layer those on top of each other over and over and over again until you get, I mean, you could also use loop out expressions or some other stuff to make it easier, but you know, this is my jank way. So let's roll. You put all of those stacked on top of each other until you get the length to fill out the comp. And then, you know, it looks like a tunnel that moves. And then the same thing happens with the shapes. They're a little bit more complicated because I wanted to have those fills inside of each of the shapes as well. They each have their own like masked layer, and then there's one like for the stroke around each shape. But it's the same thing. It's just, you know, one of these shapes comes up and it does position, scale, and rotation, so that there's something a little more interesting. But you can see it just slides down and to the left. It scales up the whole time, and then it slightly rotates the whole time. And then you just continue copy pasting those and having them appear. And one of the things that I think is funny about this, I should have found a much better way to make it look like these are sort of fading in or phasing in. Because if you watch it back, I mean, you can see it in the final version too. They just appear out of nowhere up here. Like, you can't see any more of them. And especially when it gets down to this last bit of the time remapping where it's just like really slow, you can just see them appearing. So it would have been better to maybe have like a little bit more of a scale at the beginning, or maybe there's some fade in or something to make it smoother. But, you know, that's one of the main things I would change if I went back and did this again. But that's all it is. You get all those set up in there, duplicate whatever your like base shape is over and over again, and just offset it on the timeline, and then take that pre-comp and do what we did before, where it's just got time remapping with that same sort of just like starts really fast and ends really slow vibe going on. And then on top of that, we've got the same ball from the beginning. It returns, our hero is back. And then, I mean, the rig on this guy is a little bit more complicated, but it's really not that crazy. It's just some position keyframes, and then I went in and changed the path of the motion here, and made sure that, you know, the easing was all proper. It just kind of, like, if we just watch this ball and there's no context in the background, this thing just floats up and down. And the only reason it even looks like there's depth is just because I did a slight scale down at the exact same time that it's moving. And that really helps sell the fake 3D space. And then, you know, I just brought that same set of jet particles back from the beginning, set the anchor point to the very front, and had it attached to the ball. And then I could do like this slight rotation, making it kind of jetpack across there. But I think, I mean, out of anything I've ever animated, the movement of this ball is probably one of the smoothest things I've ever done. It's just the pacing of the whole thing, and the weight of the ball makes sense. And I'm trying to make everything else feel that smooth from here on out. But all right, that's the end on that. Basically, there's just this little gradient down at the bottom here that changes color every few frames to just like sell some extra. It made it look like it was moving faster is really all I can say there when I added that. So that helped. And then moving on to the next scene, the ball comes and pops into one of the shapes here. I do another color flash because it makes it easy to hide transitions and things that way. And then, you know, load exposure flash again. And then we're like, oh, okay, so it bopped into this thing and like popped all these shapes out. Some of them are a little blurrier than others, but this is a really simple scene. All of these just, they have a little bit of a flash on them, on each one, and that's just color overlay on each of these pre-comps. Each of these shapes is a single pre-comp. And then the ball just floats around. It zooms behind here and then shoop, off to the side. And all of the pre-comps are just, all these big shapes are just attached to a null to slide out to the side, and that's it. Nothing else to that one. And then moving on here, so we just need to get the ball moving fast enough. It's zooming across here, and now we're onto this bit of hair. All these like little flexy guys here, and this definitely could have been done in an easier way, and I hope that somebody has some insight on this one, because it was just, I definitely did it in the most annoying way. I went ahead and grabbed, or there's actually all of these things at the bottom are on one single shape layer, and then it's just, I animated one of them with path animation, just doing a little like doo-doo-doo-doo, little wiggle back and forth, and then copied that path animation onto each of the ones that were underneath the ball. So like, I mean, you can see it start, like it doesn't even start on this frame, but then this one, all of them start pulling, and then the next ones start pulling, and the next ones, and the next ones, and the next ones. And it's just copy pasting that same path animation over and over again. This might have been able to be done with repeaters, but then I wonder like how you would have been able to do the multicolored lines and those sorts of things. Because I had a pretty wide variety of different ones in here. But anyway, all I had to do was animate one of them basically and then copy paste it. So it really wasn't that bad from a workflow perspective. It's just like if I wanted to go back and change it, it would have been more annoying. But that's easy enough. The ball's got some extra effects on it to make it look a little more glowy in this scene in particular. And there's some nulls, like the singular bit of these bottom bars, they're all attached to this slide along thing so that they'll like follow the ball. So as the ball moves to the right, they move to the left, so it makes it look like, you know, we're actually moving past something in 3D space instead of just things sliding next to each other. As long as the easing is the same, that works well. Although it could have been cool to have like other layers of these so we could do some parallax, but whatever. More for another day, I guess. And then the lights at the top, I actually didn't even have to animate. I thought I was gonna make them like flicker on every time the ball went past them or something, but instead I was just able to grab, which one is it? There is let's say off on this. Okay, there's just this thing called ball effects that's on each of these. And all it does is just follow the ball. It's straight up attached to it. And then each of them is, set to have I think it's got a mask on it. Is that right? Yeah, it's got a mask on it in the center with a bunch of feathering on it. So that way it essentially makes this blurred shape that we can then do an alpha matte to. So the top lights are only visible where this rectangle is, where the ball, like, that's in the same position as the ball at any given time. And that allows us to do this, like, only lighting up each of those. So there's actually a whole set of these lines here. We'll have to wait for it to cache the frame, but you can see there's a couple different layers of these lines. There's bot bars 1 and bot bars 2, and one of them, it's not, I guess it's this one. I don't know which one it is actually. One of them is set to just being purple, this dark purple color on the background, so it looks like they're in the off position. And then the one that has all the colored ones on it is the one that's set to alpha matte with the mask that's following the ball. And so it actually made it a lot easier to animate this scene than I was expecting it to be, just by having that one mask. But that was really it. Then we just kind of do the exact same scene as the very beginning, except it just, you know, it starts way off over to the side. More than it was in like in the first scene. It's straight in the center, but it's the same animation. I just add like a couple extra little shapes back here because it's just such a short end scene. And I also liked that it was kind of like a callback, like, oh, the video is going to end right now. Like, it's a little bit of an intro outro situation to like have it all be within this like pull chain situation. So I just added a couple extra shapes because I thought it made for a fun little trail and it diversified it from the beginning frame a bit more. And then it slides back over to the side and we've got our end card here, and the type is pretty simple. Let me open this whole thing up. So the type's got some echo on it, and there's this extra bit that's up here, and all that is just for layer styles on this. So I went in and added inner shadow, inner glow, bevel and emboss, and satin, and then I made sure that under advanced blending that the fill opacity was set to 0, and that makes it so I can just have those layer styles on a separate layer over top of everything else. And then I made a single background here. Let me actually solo that for you. All it is a 4-color gradient with some curves on it, and then those points animate. So like the points themselves move, but we also have this like swapping between colors happening on hold keyframes. So there's that. And then let me fix that again. Get it back to how it was. There we go. Okay, so we've got that masked into the text here, which is why I needed that other layer of text with the layer styles on it to begin with, because I couldn't add those layer styles over top of the other one because it would be turned off. But anyway, then I have the same background here, except it's just matted to this shape here, which is just a super jagged mask, basically, for us to alpha matte to. And then it's got a big blur on it and some turbulent display so that it can like click between these different positions and look like a little bit more organic and interesting. Felt like it was time to spice up an end card, you know? It's always just the type on it, and I figured, you know, I'm going this crazy with all the other stuff, and why not add some extra color into this? And it really made for an interesting effect. But yeah, there's the whole project. That's all of it. Explained in an hour and 10 minutes, as opposed to making it in 14 on stream. Much more efficient this way. Nathan says, love this, Austin. Glad to see you, Nathan. Welcome. Saint Cubing says, OMG, it's the real Austin Bauwens. It's me. I'm here. Zengain says, hey, Saint Cubing. Oh my god. Glad to see all y'all. Glad to see you. Welcome back. But yeah, there's all the fun shenanigans. If anybody has specific questions about any of the other parts, feel free to ask away, or just any other questions in general. I'll be here hanging for like another 30 minutes or so. So any questions or any of that jazz, or we can end it early. But I hope that was helpful to y'all in the slightest, in some way. But we'll switch it on over to just chatting, and I'll just leave this looping in the background while we hang out and chat. Zengain says, bunch of cool, interesting stuff. Thanks for the breakdown. Anytime. Happy to do it. It helps me think through my process more anyway than I would otherwise if I didn't stream it. So it's definitely beneficial to me as well. Like there's a lot of things there after looking back at it now and not being as attached to it because I'm not like just trying to get it out. It's much easier for me to see lots of things that I would have changed or could have done differently. Terry says, who are some of your favorite motion artists? That's a good cue. Let's open up a tab here and look up a few, shall we? I mean, obviously, Ordinary Folk. I definitely get plenty of inspiration from them. And Jorge, their founder, is a really cool guy. And he hasn't posted anything in a really long time, but I mean, you can go back and watch any of his projects from like even 2016 and before, and all of them are absolutely fantastic still to look at. But anyway, Jorge is a great example. Let's go check out Hobbs. Hobbs is another favorite of mine. They do lots of like very, very flat work, but it's always in a very interesting way, and they do lots of things with code as well. They do a lot of the work for Google. Just really interesting, cool people. That's not the one I'm looking for. I particularly like this video. I'll actually pause the Spotify thing. Just that logo animation at the end is all I need. It feels so squishy and nice and smooth. I don't know, it just feels really great. And like their use of fake 3D and all that, it's just very clean motion design, and that's all I really need. They also do lots of cool things for drone shows. Like they'll do 3D animation for drone shows. It's very interesting. Ordinary Folk, Hobbs, I mean, there's a bunch of classics. Oddfellows does fantastic work. Their reel from 2016 is still one of my favorite reels of all time. And they haven't made one since, I don't think. Let's see. I don't do 3D, but I am certainly envious of Tendril. There's a few really, really great 3D studios, but like anything from Tendril, especially on the sound design department, is just absolutely fantastic. My favorite, I really like the orbs and things in this video.
Sometimes, to see differently,
Give it a look here.
we need to disrupt the ordinary.
They also did a lot of the new Microsoft
Get curious.
videos.
Look beyond the physical.
Super cool
Examine.
lines,
From different angles. Like this.
interesting generatives. Always with the fun
To
materials.
think differently.
Crazy looking ripples going
We need
on.
to use data in new ways.
It just all feels
Assess
very
real
tangible and
problems
tactile.
in real time. And all in one place.
That
feels better.
so satisfying. Are you
By
kidding me?
connecting differently, we open access to a world of expertise.
Ah,
Unlock new ways
so
to
pretty.
collaborate. And improve how we communicate. And by operating differently, we empower people with
I love the
data-driven
glow on
knowledge.
those numbers.
Enable them to make efficient, timely decisions. And lead with confidence.
Their fabric sims are always really cool. They did a whole thing for
Let's shape the world
beauty
we
rest
want to work in.
mattresses that's really, really great.
As we see it. As only we can. There's never been a better time to see things differently.
Not so sure about this logo at the end, but the rest of it, really great. But anyway, those are some of my favorites off the top of my head. I followed hundreds and hundreds of motion designers. It's hard to get through all of them, but these are just some of my favorite studios that I always look at work from. And yeah, Terry says these are great. Some new ones in there I haven't heard from. Thanks. Anytime. Always happy to share them. Andy says it's great to have you walk through the animation, Austin. Nice insights. Appreciate it. Glad to hear from you. Well, all right, y'all. Unless there's any other questions or anything, and that'll do it for the breakdown. And we'll all be just as a side note, everyone on the Revie team will be hanging out in the general voice chat on the Revie Discord server in 30 minutes from now. So if you want to hang out and chat with everybody as well as some other motion designers, that'll be a really great place to do that. Link is in the description for the Discord, I believe. And if it's not, then here it is in the chat right now. Cool. And then, all right. Yeah, so if you be on the lookout for that, that'll be really fun. It's going to be good to hang with everybody again. It's been a long time since we've had time to be able to just hang in the Discord, but we want to make that a more regular thing. Terry says, can you show off some of your older stuff just to see how your style has progressed over the years? You shouldn't open that rabbit hole. I'm going to be streaming for another hour. No, I won't. But I will. I'll go through some stuff. Let me move back to a screen. Oh crap! I accidentally did it to where I can't see my chat now. That's awkward. Anyway, let me move back to a screen where I can hide some stuff so that I don't accidentally show any like client stuff that's under NDA or whatever. But any hoosers, I will certainly be happy to open up some old stuff. I can actually pull up my old Google Drive. That'd probably be a good way to do that. So before I did projects for larger businesses, and we had Revie and all that stuff, I did a lot of work in a small niche of software companies on Twitter that help people resell sneakers and streetwear and that sort of thing. Anyway, and there are, I did dozens and dozens of projects for those, and I would usually make them in like 8 hours or something. There's a couple that like we really put a lot of I put a lot of time into because it was just me freelancing. And those are on some of those are still on our website, but there are so many of them that are just like hooey, not great, but they were certainly a start, that's for sure. Let me find the first one that I ever did. It should be under, yeah, here we go. This is the first client project that I ever worked on. And I was very new to After Effects. I had only been using it for maybe 2 months. And boy, oh boy, did I really like using lots of different effects and things. I'll just give it all that as a caveat. 37 seconds. Embrace yourselves. Or brace yourselves. And embrace yourselves, I guess. That's wholesome. If whatever. Here we go. First project. Oh yeah. That hard trap beat. Yeah. Oh shoot, I'm not streaming it. That's so awkward. No, I forgot to get back. All right, guys, I got it. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm fixing it. I fixed it. I'll give all my reactions again. Don't worry. All right, here we go. Here we go. Should be good now. Oh yeah, we can read that text in that amount of time. That's for sure. Oh, can you put a lens flare? Oh, good, great. Can we shake the camera a couple more times, do you think? Maybe right here? We weren't lucky enough. Yeah, this is the longest 37 seconds of my life. Oh my God. Y'all, I have some things to point out about this video. In case, I mean, it looks perfect, I know, but boy, have I got some things to note. Let's start with, yeah, the very intense camera shake at the beginning. I like these gradient bars in the background. They're kind of cool. That type animation's not too bad. I don't know what this like thing of dots that goes over every other element on the screen is every few seconds. I'm pretty sure it was like a PNG that I just put a mask on or something. But yeah, there's that. This thing, you'll notice this video screen cap of this phone screen shows up a bunch of times throughout the video, and I can't blame it on the client because I should have noticed, but I didn't trim it to be rounded, so you can like see the edges of the phone screen rounded here. It's just like this odd gray background that's just completely not cropped or anything there. These lines are really cool looking. I didn't even have deep glow. I don't know how I made them look like that. So much text on here. I would only ever go for like one line or a few words of text on screen at a time at this point, unless it's a really long cinematic thing. And even in that case, I'm still probably just putting like one small line of text and then replacing it with whatever the next line is when it needs to be read or said or whatever. And again, this thing appears and goes over all of the elements, which is fun. These weird 3D rotations where you can very clearly see the edges of the comp cutting off. That's fun. Super low res, like phone screen recording. This one's better. It doesn't have the edges on it. That's good. Again, a lot of text, really strange. Like just the pacing is all super off because like the pacing of the motion itself is not matching the music or the audio. So the things that I'm doing to make up for that are just like adding in these huge things of camera shake and lens flares and other shit. And that's so like that part syncs up with the music, but the rest of the motion doesn't really. And that just is a little strange. It takes me out of it. But yeah, you can very clearly see it here. This just completely uncropped footage. I added lots of fun like background elements and stuff. That phone is not 3D at all. It's like it's on a 3D layer, but it's just a completely flat thing of footage, and it looks pretty 3D there. And then, you know, same thing here, uncropped. And then, you know, this like super pixelated stuff at the end. But, you know, it's really easy to rag on it at this point because I just wouldn't make something like this at this point. But for a first go at it, not nearly as bad as it could have been. That's for sure. The colors and stuff were all pretty good. And, you know, there's there's some meat there. We're at a good starting point, I think. Razima says, hey, Austin, any tips on how to write script/screenplay for motion design? It's a pretty abstract thing, honestly, but typically our guiding light for it is just trying to make it as unsalesy as possible. Like really just trying to sound authentic and like you're talking to someone, but at the same time, also actually getting your point across, like giving the person useful information instead of just saying super vague things that don't actually like, I don't even have an example that I can give because I can't like point out something about a client's script or something. But there's always something with a script that we see where there's just like a couple lines that are completely just filler or just to like make something sound good without saying anything. So it's really trying to make sure like what you're saying needs to be said and that it actually contributes more to the script rather than just continuing to repeat yourself or just saying things just for fluff or whatever. But anyway, that's our biggest tip. And then also keep it short, especially now just for advertising is a difficult thing to be longer than 60 seconds really. Cause I mean, most people just aren't going to be sitting somewhere to be able to see that and take it in. So those would be my tips. Keep it short and sweet. Make sure you're actually saying something and make sure that you're coming across authentically. There you go. Cool. But that's just, that's just one of them. There's actually, wait, why am I on here? I can go to my super old portfolio. Although this one won't have as many of the really bad ones on it because this will have some good ones on it. This is always a really fun one to go through. This one was for Breeze AIO, which is like some all-in-one software tool. Most of these don't even exist anymore. That's kind of the funny thing. Like most of these companies existed for like a year and then went out of business. But I was also only selling these for like $200 or something. So I definitely wasn't the one putting them out of business with the videos. But anyway, this one, boy, if you guys think I like Glow now. Look at all that glow, all those dots in the background. Yeah. Do you know it's an app? That's cool. There's the phone. Fast AIO monitors exclusive features. And, 25 different pieces of text or something. I remember giving feedback on this too, because I mean, I didn't understand how to really make sure there was text that was readable for people at this point, but I still knew that this was too much. But they wanted all of them in there because they thought that people would sit there and pause the ad like I'm doing right now to review it, to actually go through and look at every one of the features or something. And maybe they did, but I don't know. I still think it's kind of insane. Anyway, that's a cool thing. We use that in a reel, I'm pretty sure. I mean, there's like little bits and pieces of things in each of these. But this was all just stock CC glow in After Effects, as well as probably some like outer glow and other stuff. But that's all that there. This one has a really cool moment in it, but there's plenty of other things in it I don't particularly like. Also, all very intense like trap beats were used at this time. It's just like what this industry wanted. Right there, that's a pretty cool moment. Like I'd still make something that looked like that. This one has really good pacing too. This one was my second client project I ever did. So I really learned a lot from that first A-Preem video to this one. Like this one, pacing and stuff all feels pretty right. There's definitely some spots that could be a little bit longer for type readability and all that stuff, but like generally that's a pretty good one I still like. There's some cool things on this video, but the audio track is like a meme amongst me and Noah and anybody else I've ever shown it to at this point, because it just is like, oh boy. It's ridiculous. This one's pretty good. There's some, like, I like the compositions on a lot of these, but there are some weird parts, like this pre-comp gets cut off entirely. And then, yeah, I'll go back and look through it. The stuff at the beginning I think is really cool. Like, I don't necessarily like the type that much, but I guess I really liked chromatic aberration right here. But these like trails in the background I think are so cool looking. And that like pulse off there is interesting. These are fun, but as you'll see in a second, there's some problem with the pre-comp. So whatever effects I put over this thing messed with it. To where like right there's like these little dots that show up randomly. There's lots of like weird pre-comping problems in this one, but anyway. And then really fun thing. Up until what? When did I start using Overlord? You know when I started using plugins. It wasn't very long ago. It was before I started doing the loops, so I guess actually it's probably been like a year that I've been using plugins at this point. But before that, no Overlord. Everything was being made in After Effects, including all of these icons, with the After Effects pen tool. And it was awful, which is why this guy looks like super jagged and weird. But I mean, there were some bigger projects that I had to work on when I worked at this other marketing agency where I was still using pen tool and some other things. And it was, like I would have to make entire maps and things sometimes with just the pen tool and After Effects because I didn't know how to transfer stuff from Illustrator to After Effects yet. And even when I figured that out, like I still would make some stuff in After Effects. But there was probably like 2.5 years that I was just not using anything but After Effects to animate. And then there's maybe like a year where I would, or maybe it's like 2 years of just After Effects, then a year of dragging and dropping Illustrator files into After Effects, and then now a year of using Overlord, which has by far been the easiest one, obviously. But anyway. Olkjerd, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry. Please let me know how to pronounce your name. But I appreciate you. For a second client project, it's not that bad. How long have you been learning After Effects at that time? First project was probably, so that A-Prem one we looked at was probably like like 2 months of After Effects, and then that second one was probably a month after that, so maybe like 3 months of After Effects at that point, something like that. Yeah, cool. Also, is it Olgerd? Olgerd? Cool name. I just need some assistance. Anyway, there's a bunch of other things. When it came to not doing these like streetwear videos with phones and stuff, like I made this YouTube intro for somebody. I think this one still holds up. Like, there's definitely some things I would change now, but like generally that could still work today. Like I could post that and people would probably think it was cool. I still go back and watch it every once in a while. But also, oh my God, I completely forgot about that. I did these trim paths things over type and logos and stuff at the beginning of so many videos at that time. And I'm just now realizing, because I had to do all of my pen tool in After Effects, that means that I had to trace each of these by hand with pen tool. And I only realized it because down here, like when that U was being outlined, it's all like, there's like some weird little like chunks in it where I can see where the anchor points were. That's so funny. I completely forgot about that until just now. That was always a really hard part of the process because I had a really like crappy computer at this point too. And so like even just making points on the pen tool to make those paths would make it lag, and I don't know how I ever got any of these done. Shivendra says, have you ever tried 3D? I sure have. I did one. Well, okay, let's go to my Instagram for a second. There are a bunch of things that I did 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, where I was just doing tests for things in 3D just for fun. Here's one of them. We had to make some like letter forms for one of my college classes, and so we designed them in 3D, and then, you know, I did this like animated walkthrough of them. It's all like super low FPS, but I mean, I like my shines and glows and stuff, so there's some of that. This is over 2.5 years old at this point, but there's that one. It zooms through. There's these guys, some cool lights and stuff behind them. What else? And then I started getting on a kind of a 3D kick later on. So yeah, we're like a year ago, 2 years ago from right now, I started making some things like this where they weren't animated, but they're all just like cool wallpaper looking things. I really like this one still. It's just an interesting like crystallized looking thing. Then we got this one, much more reflective, like glassy sort of situation. And then this other thing for the marketing agency that I worked for, me, I guess. And then I did some like fluid sims and other things. Here's another little thing of globes, whatever. But I only ever animated one client project in 3D, and it was for that marketing agency. It's for this company called Nita Gelatin that makes a bunch of like gelatin products and collagen peptides and those sorts of things. And so I made one video for them that was all 2D, and then they came back wanting another video to talk about like their how they're like helping the planet and reducing their climate impact and all that stuff. But this first one was just like a brief overview of their product. I'll make sure that the sound's on.
Collagen peptides are tiny bioactive pieces of collagen protein, which offer unique benefits within the body. Wellnex by Nita Gelatin has pioneered the identification of active collagen molecule components. These
like 2 years
include
ago.
functional
I think this is still a pretty
dipeptides
cool video.
proline hydroxyproline and hydroxyproline glycine. Wellnex introduces Replenwell collagen peptides, a new line of highly functional collagen ingredients developed for optimized dipeptide levels and
I don't
clinically
like this
tested for
illustration,
safety
though.
and efficacy. Wellnex Replenwell. Proven support for healthy skin, bone, and joint applications.
I think that's a fun video though. I really liked producing that one. And I didn't post the 3D one I made for them, but here's a style frame from it. And we can watch the whole thing here. Yeah, there it is. It's my first time I ever animated a whole video in 3D. I had no like real long form animation experience before this. This was also like the longest video I ever made up until this point. It's 1 minute and 45
For
seconds.
over 100 years,
Oh, that's not HD. Let's fix that.
for over 100 years, Nita Gelatin has worked to unlock a world of possibilities for collagen and gelatin ingredients within the nutritional, pharmaceutical, and biomedical markets. In 2020, Nita Gelatin North America redoubled their corporate social responsibility, or CSR, efforts with the
forever to get
creation
that
of a
thing to
new
flop
internal
over.
working group to foster ideas, actions, policies, and programs that advance our responsibilities to improve our overall environment consisting of our planet, our people, and our communities. We've partnered with EcoVadis, the world's largest and most trusted
And now we're
CSR
in
assessment
2D land,
platform,
but-
and were awarded the Bronze Medal for our sustainability
Also like
rating in
really
2021.
overpowering glow there.
This recognition
3D
serves as
particle
both
system.
an honor and inspiration as we work to further strengthen CSR goals in the years to come. In order
I
to
like this
translate our
globe a lot,
CSR
though.
principles into meaningful actions, Nita Gelatin embraces the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and the ISO 26000 standard. Reducing environmental impact and improving energy efficiency are shared goals among our global manufacturing facilities. And our North American plants have shown year-over-year reductions in total
They're talking
carbon
about
emissions
emissions,
for
so I
3
thought it looked
consecutive
like
years beginning in
smoke coming up.
2018, and including a 26.9% reduction in emissions for Nita Gelatin USA. Additionally, our recent switch to energy-efficient lighting at Nita Gelatin Canada resulted in a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions associated with lighting by 55.3%. At Nita Gelatin North America, rising to the challenges of tomorrow means taking action today.
Ta-da! The only 3D thing, or like fully 3D long form video I've ever done. And I guess it's not even fully 3D. Mostly 3D, I guess. I don't need caveats for this. But it was a fun one to work on. I remember it being pretty stressful at the time, but I mean, looking back, it's some of that stuff still holds up, especially given it's my like first time I'd ever made something like that. But anyway, it is 5 minutes until we're all gonna hang out in the Reviewed Discord with the whole team. So I'll want to hop in and hang with everybody a little early, but feel free to join that. The Discord is here again. I'll type it out, and we will all hang in there in like 5 minutes, and I will see y'all there. But In the meantime, let me answer this last thing. Guys, Cinema 4D or Blender. I like how Blender UI works, but I feel like Cinema 4D is still more used on agencies and studio pipelines nowadays. It seems like Cinema 4D has a lot of like power and tools and stuff. But I agree with you that Blender seems a little bit more approachable. I mean, that's what I've used for like anything I've done 3D wise. But anyway, I gotta run, but I will chat with all y'all in the Discord. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I will catch all y'all very, very soon. And be on the lookout for another loop pretty soon as well. But anyway, have a good one, y'all. Appreciate it. Let me know if you have any questions or anything on the loop. Feel free to DM me or email me or whatever, and I'll get back to you when I can. All right. See y'all soon. Peace.